That morning, Anton was sitting in the kitchen with Christina and discussing me. I was standing in the hallway in my slippers, listening. She just doesn't understand how it looks from the outside. How does it look? Like this. Sits around all day, reads, watches the news, doesn't talk to anyone. Anton, she's 63. Exactly. She's 63, not 83. We have to do something. I walked back to my room, picked up my phone from the nightstand, my regular iPhone, not the senior-friendly phone with big buttons they bought me the week before, and which I had politely returned. Sat down on the bed. So, we have to do something. All right then. My name is Nina Sokolova, 63 years old, 38 years as chief accountant. I can read a balance sheet at a glance, manage a team of 40 people, and find an error in a 300-row spreadsheet in 20 minutes. 3 months ago, I moved in with my son, temporarily, while the paperwork closed on my new apartment. Maybe you're thinking right now, what's the big deal? The son is worried, the daughter-in-law is concerned, just a normal family. Wait, you don't know about the corporate party yet. About the phone with the big buttons, about how Christina introduced me to his colleagues while I was standing 2 feet away and heard every word. I'll get to all of that. I'll tell you everything. But first, about that morning in the kitchen, because that's when I made my decision. In 3 months, I had learned the following. Anton believed I was losing my pace a little. Christina believed I was a little isolated. At the corporate party the week before, she had been telling his colleagues about this while I stood 2 feet away holding a glass of wine. I said nothing, smiled, went home. They decided the matter was closed. They didn't know one thing. 38 years in accounting teaches you not to explode right away. It teaches you to gather information. Wait. And then present everything at once at the most inconvenient possible moment. Anton told me I needed to socialize. I agreed. That same day, I joined 4 group chats for their building. Within a week, the whole entrance knew me. Within 2 weeks, the whole courtyard. Within a month, Christina discovered I was in her best friend's chat. How I got there, she still doesn't understand. Anton asked me to slow down a little. You're the one who said I should socialize. I meant quietly. Ah, a pause. You meant exist, but not be in the way. Breathe, but every other breath. Mom, understood. I'll keep that in mind. I kept nothing in mind. This is the story of how my son asked me to socialize, and how I took that as a directive. If you want the details, he still can't get into the elevator of his own building without running into someone who knows me personally. Let me start from the beginning. I moved into Anton and Christina's apartment on a Tuesday in September. My apartment had sold faster than expected, and the new one wasn't ready to close for another 3 months. Anton had insisted. Mom, of course. What are you talking about? We have the guest room. It's no problem. He said it the way people say things they genuinely mean, but haven't fully thought through. I packed 2 suitcases, left the rest in storage, told myself, 3 months. I'm not in anyone's way. I'll sit quietly. For the first 2 weeks, it really was quiet. I cooked dinner when they came home late, watered Christina's plants when she forgot, went to bed early, woke up early, drank my coffee by the window, and watched the courtyard below. A courtyard I didn't know, in a building I didn't know, in a neighborhood where I knew no one. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't lonely. It was. But it was a manageable kind of lonely, the kind you can handle when you know it's temporary. The first sign that something was off came at the end of week 2. I was in the kitchen making tea when Anton walked in with a colleague, a young man named Dima, who had stopped by to pick up a laptop. They were talking about something work-related, and I said hello and offered tea. Dima smiled and said yes, normal enough. But then Anton said something, casual, offhand, as if I wasn't standing 3 feet away, stirring a teapot. Mom's staying with us for a bit. She's going through a transition. We're trying to keep her engaged. Dima nodded with the expression of someone who hears this kind of thing about elderly relatives and finds it mildly touching. I set the teapot down, poured 3 cups, said nothing. Transition. As if I had lost something and was being helped to recover, as if I were a project. I handed Dima his tea. He thanked me. They left 10 minutes later. I washed the cups and thought about what that word meant exactly coming from my son. 38 years, chief accountant of Sever Invest Construction Holdings, 40-person department, annual budget oversight of 400 million rubles. The kind of job where if you make a mistake, people go to prison, so you learn not to make mistakes. Transition. Fine, I let it go. People say things without thinking. He didn't mean anything by it. He was just explaining the situation quickly to a colleague, and he grabbed the first word that came to hand. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. The phone arrived on a Saturday. Christina came home from shopping with a bag and a very particular expression. The expression of someone who has done something generous and would like credit for it. She set a box on the kitchen table in front of me. On the box, in large, friendly letters, "Smartphone for the senior generation, simplified interface, large text, emergency button." I looked at the box. I looked at my iPhone, which was sitting on the table next to it. I looked at Christina. "Nina Petrovna, we got you a gift."
It's a special phone. Everything is simple. The interface is easy to understand. And there's an emergency button if something happens. I already have a phone. Yes, but this one is more convenient. The font is bigger, and the buttons... Christina, a pause. I've been managing spreadsheets in Excel since 1988. I do my banking on this phone. I file my taxes through an app. Last month, I had a video call with my accountant in 3 time zones simultaneously. Another pause. Thank you for the concern. I slid the box back across the table, got up, took my coffee to the other room. Behind me, I heard Christina exhale, a very quiet, controlled exhale of someone who has decided to be patient. That was the moment I started paying closer attention, not to what they said, to what they did when they thought I wasn't watching. The corporate party was 2 weeks after the phone. Anton had invited me himself. "Come meet the team, Mom, it'll be good for you." And I had almost declined, because I generally don't enjoy standing in a room full of people half my age discussing software updates. But something made me go. I'm not sure what exactly. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was bored. Maybe some small part of me wanted to believe he meant it simply, just come, just meet people, just be there. The party was at a restaurant on the 2nd floor of a business center. Decent wine, loud music, the kind of ambient noise that makes it hard to have any real conversation. I took a glass of something dry and white and started making my way toward Anton, who I could see at the bar across the room. I had just come through the entrance when I heard Christina's voice. She was standing with her back to me, about 6 feet away, talking to 2 of Anton's colleagues. She had a glass in her hand. Her voice was a little louder than usual, the level of loudness that comes from a second glass of wine and genuine comfort. She's sweet, of course, but you know how it is with people her age. They start to fall out of things a little, isolate themselves. Anton worries about her. We took her in. We try to make sure she has things to do, that she's not sitting alone. The colleague standing across from her glanced past Christina's shoulder, directly at me. Christina turned around. I was standing 2 feet away, glass in my hand, nothing on my face. "Good evening." A pause. "I'm Nina, Anton's mother. 38 years as chief accountant." A pause. Not isolated. The colleague found a reason to be somewhere else with impressive speed. Christina smiled, the particular smile I had come to know over those 3 months, the one where the mouth does the work and the eyes stay completely still. Nina Petrovna, you made it. How wonderful. Anton invited me. Of course. Come, I'll introduce you to everyone. She took my arm. I let her. We crossed the room together. She introduced me to 5 people in 10 minutes. I smiled at each of them, made small talk, asked about their work. One of them, a young woman named Vera, said she'd heard I used to work in construction, and we ended up talking for 20 minutes about accounting software and whether anyone in Russia had actually successfully implemented SAP without spending 3 years in tears. It was the most real conversation I'd had in weeks. On the way home, Anton drove and Christina looked at her phone. I watched the city through the window. Good evening. You seem to enjoy yourself. I did. See? I told you it would be good to get out. I said nothing. Anton? After a moment. How long has Christina been describing me as isolated to your colleagues? Silence. Christina stopped scrolling. Mom, she just is worried. I know. I turned back to the window. He thought the subject was closed. He was wrong.
3 days after the party, on a Tuesday morning, I heard them talking again. I had gotten up earlier than usual. I couldn't sleep. And I was already in the hallway, heading for the kitchen, when I heard their voices through the half-open door. I stopped. Not to eavesdrop exactly, more because something in the tone made me pause. She barely leaves the apartment. She goes to the store. That doesn't count. What do you want her to do? I don't know, something, classes, a club. She used to work with people every day, and now she just sits there. It can't be good for her. She seems fine. Anton. She's not fine. She's disappearing into herself. I see it. You don't want to see it, but I do. A pause. Maybe you're right. We should encourage her. Tell her to go out more, meet people, sign up for something. She won't want to. She will if you ask. She always listens to you. I stood in the hallway for another moment. Then I walked back to my room quietly and sat on the edge of the bed. Disappearing into myself. I turned the phrase over in my mind the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath it. I thought about my old department, the morning meetings where I ran the numbers and everyone listened. The young accountants who came to me with problems and left with solutions. The feeling of walking into a room and being the person who knew how things worked. I thought about the storage unit where I had put everything that didn't fit in 2 suitcases. I thought about the word transition. Then I picked up my phone and opened the internet. By 9 in the morning, I had registered for 5 things. Nordic Walking Club, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7:30 a.m., the park, 3 metro stops away. Conversational Spanish, Mondays and Wednesdays, 6 p.m., a language school 15 minutes by bus. Philosophy and Wine, every other Friday evening, a discussion club that met in different apartments. The next meeting was at a woman named Nadezhda's place. Historical Reenactment Society, Saturdays, a suburb. Come curious, leave in period costume. Those were their exact words. And improvisational theater for beginners, Sunday afternoons, a small studio above a bookshop. I spent 20 more minutes reading the descriptions. Then I went to the kitchen and made coffee. Anton was already there, scrolling his phone. Morning, Mom. Sleep okay? Fine.
I set 2 cups on the table and sat across from him. "I've been thinking about what you said." He looked up. "You're right. I should be getting out more, socializing." His face did something interesting. It moved through surprise, then relief, then a kind of satisfaction that was slightly too quick to arrive. "That's great, Mom. Really. I think it'll be good for you." "I think so too." I wrapped my hands around my cup. "I signed up for a few things this morning." "Yeah? Like what?" "Nordic walking, Spanish, a philosophy discussion, historical reenactment, improvisational theater." A pause. "All of them?" It seemed efficient to start broadly and see what I enjoy. He opened his mouth, closed it, nodded slowly. "Sure, yeah, that's great. I thought you'd be pleased." "I am, totally." He picked up his phone again. "Really great, Mom." Christina appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later, in her workout clothes, already checking her watch. "Morning." She glanced at me. "You're up early." "I signed up for some clubs." "Oh?" She poured herself water. "What kind?" "Nordic walking, Spanish, philosophy, historical reenactment, and improvisational theater." Christina lowered her glass, looked at Anton. He gave her a very small shrug that he probably thought I didn't see. "Well," she said carefully, "that sounds like a lot." "You said I needed to socialize." "Right, yes, absolutely," she smiled. "Good for you, Nina Petrovna." She left for her workout. I finished my coffee and went to find my walking shoes. The first 3 weeks were, from Anton and Christina's perspective, entirely manageable. I left the apartment at 7:30 on Tuesday and Thursday mornings and came back by 10. I went to Spanish on Monday and Wednesday evenings and came back by 8. Normal hours, no disruption. Christina stopped asking where I was going. Anton started using phrases like, "Mom's really taken to her new routine," when he spoke to friends on the phone. Everything was fine. And then philosophy and wine started. The first meeting was at Nadezhda's apartment, a large, warm place full of books and mismatched furniture, and a cat named Fyodor, who sat on the table and was not asked to leave. There were 9 of us. We were supposed to be discussing free will, but for the first 40 minutes, we talked about whether Nadezhda's neighbor had the legal right to confiscate the building's communal mop. I hadn't laughed that hard in 4 months. I came home at 11:15. Anton was still awake on the sofa. He looked up when I came in, with the look of a person who expected someone back by 9. "Good time?" "Excellent. Nadezhda has remarkable bookshelves, and her cat has opinions." "Maybe let us know if you're going to be late so we don't worry." "Of course." I went to make tea. In the kitchen, I found a note on the refrigerator in Christina's handwriting. "Please don't put unlabeled containers in the fridge." I looked at the note. I opened the fridge. On the second shelf sat a small container I'd put there that afternoon. Borscht I'd made for Margarita from the philosophy discussion, who had mentioned her husband was recovering from surgery and she hadn't had time to cook. I had labeled it with her name and a description. Evidently, for Margarita, borscht, met at philosophy, her husband is recovering, did not count as adequate labeling. I took the note down, put it in the recycling, wrote a new label, for Margarita, borscht, her husband is ill, Tuesday pickup. Then I went to bed. The following Tuesday, Margarita came by at noon to collect the borscht. She stayed for 2 hours. When she left, she hugged me at the door and said she'd see me Friday. I stood in the hallway for a moment after she left, and I noticed something. The apartment felt different, larger somehow, more aired out.
Christina came home at 7 and opened the fridge. "Who is Margarita?" "From philosophy. Her husband had surgery. I made her borscht." "She was here?" "For tea, yes." Christina said nothing, but I noticed she moved the container to the bottom shelf. 2 weeks later, the containers multiplied. This happened naturally, the way things tend to when you start paying attention to people. At Nordic Walking, I met Svetlana Borisovna, who was 71 and walked faster than anyone else and had a knee that gave her trouble on stairs. I wrote her a compress recipe my mother used. She appeared at the door on Wednesday with a jar of pickled tomatoes from her dacha and stayed for lunch. At Spanish, I met Pablo, actually named Pavel, but he had chosen a Spanish name for class and now preferred it in most contexts. He taught at a music conservatory, was deeply committed to veganism in a way that made conventional cooking for him nearly impossible, and had a laugh that made everyone in a room turn around. He mentioned once that he could never find anything to eat at social gatherings. I started keeping a small container of roasted chickpeas in the fridge for when he came by, which began happening on Thursday evenings. By the middle of week 3, the fridge contained, at various points, Svetlana Borisovna's pickled tomatoes labeled, "For anyone, very good." Roasted chickpeas labeled, "For Pablo, vegan, do not eat." Half a tart from Nadezhda labeled, "From Nadezhda, lemon, excellent." A small pot of stuffed cabbage from Margarita labeled, "Margarita's thank you." One morning, Anton opened the refrigerator, stood in front of it for a full 30 seconds, and called Christina into the kitchen. They stood together, reading the labels in silence. "Who is Pablo?" "Spanish class. He's vegan." "Why is he in our refrigerator?" "He's not in the refrigerator. His chickpeas are." "Mom." "Anton, I didn't look up from my book. You told me to meet people. These are the people I've met. They eat food. Sometimes I give them food. This is, as far as I understand it, how human connection works." A pause. The refrigerator hummed. "Maybe we could have a shelf specifically for your friend's food, so we know which things are whose." "That's a sensible solution." He designated the bottom shelf. Within 4 days, the bottom shelf had overflowed onto the second shelf. I organized everything with a color-coded labeling system and explained it via a written note on the refrigerator door. Christina read the note 3 times. Then she took it down and put it in her pocket. I never found out what she did with it. The Historical Reenactment Society deserves its own paragraph. By the 3rd Saturday, I had a dress. By the 5th Saturday, I had the dress, a proper head covering, and a convincing opinion about the cut of a 17th century sarafan that I delivered in a debate with a retired military engineer named Gennady. We argued pleasantly for 40 minutes and reached no conclusion, which Gennady said was the correct outcome because historians themselves hadn't. The prop situation developed from there. The group needed somewhere to store things between meetings. I offered a corner of the guest room. This is how a halberd ended up in the hallway. To be precise, it was not a real halberd. It was a very convincing replica, about 6 feet tall, which belonged to Gennady and which he had been keeping in his storage unit. I brought it home on a Thursday evening. Anton was in the hallway when I came in. He looked at the halberd. He looked at me. "What is that?" "A halberd. It belongs to Gennady from the Historical Society. I'm keeping it temporarily." "A halberd?" "Yes, 17th century, or a reasonable approximation thereof." "Where is it going to live?" "Here, for now, until we find a better solution." "We don't have a better solution." "Then here, for now." I leaned it against the wall. It looked quite dignified there. 3 days later, the halberd was joined by a painted shield with a stylized bird on it, which I propped next to it. This did transform the entrance into something that looked like the antechamber of a minor principality. Anton's colleague Dima stopped by that Saturday to pick up some documents and stood in the doorway looking at the display. Are you expecting a siege? Historical reenactment. Right. He nodded slowly. Your mom? My mom. Anton handed him the folder and steered him back toward the door. After Dima left, Anton stood in the hallway. Mom, the halberd needs to go somewhere else. Where would you suggest? He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the halberd. Storage, our storage unit, in the basement. We have one? Every apartment has one. Wonderful, that solves it. I'll need the key. He gave me the key. The halberd moved to storage. The shield stayed for another week because I forgot about it, and by the time I remembered, Anton had apparently reached some private accommodation with it and stopped mentioning it. It was still there when I moved out. The building chats came about by accident, or so I let Anton believe. In truth, it had occurred to me on week 3 when I was sitting by the window watching the courtyard and thinking about what I actually knew about the world I was temporarily inhabiting. I knew the layout of the apartment. I knew the route to the nearest grocery store. I knew which elevator was faster, and I knew nothing, absolutely nothing, about the 140 people who lived in this building around me. I found the first chat by asking the woman in the elevator who was carrying a large amount of groceries and looked like someone who had lived here long enough to know things. Her name was Vera. She was on the 6th floor, and she sent me the link to the general building chat before we reached the 2nd floor landing. The chat was called Our Home General. It had 212 members and the ambient energy of a small parliament in permanent session. I read the backlog for 2 hours. By the end, I had a working understanding of every ongoing conflict in the building. The parking dispute between apartments on the 2nd floor and the 4th, a silver Honda belonging to a man named Gerasimov had been standing in a disputed spot for 3 years, and both sides had documentation. The matter of the cat, who was being fed by approximately 9 separate people, none of whom claimed ownership. The ongoing question of who was responsible for the light bulb in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors that had been out since March, and the situation with the management company, which apparently owed the building a boiler repair from 2021 and had been providing creative explanations for the delay ever since. I had seen more complicated financial disputes. In my 3rd year as department head, I had untangled a 3-year cash flow problem that 4 different accountants before me had documented incorrectly, and done it in 11 days. I typed my first message. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nina Petrovna, temporarily staying in apartment 213. A question about the building. Whose silver Honda is in spot number 12? There appears to be a leak. I wanted to alert the owner in case it needs attention. Within 4 minutes, there were 23 replies. 6 of them were people explaining who I was and that I was new. 4 were people immediately resuming the argument about spot number 12 and whose right it was. 2 were welcoming messages. 1 was a phone number from someone who said they knew a mechanic. 1 was from a man named Semyonich, who I gathered was the building superintendent, that said simply, "That's my car, thank you." And 1 was a private message from a woman on the 5th floor who wrote, "Finally, someone is asking sensible questions. I've been trying to get that spot issue resolved for a year. Can we talk?" Her name was Lena. She was 31, on maternity leave with a 5-month-old, and she had the precise, exhausted clarity of a person who has not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in several months and is therefore operating on pure adrenaline and principle. We met for coffee the next morning. I brought a cake. She brought the baby, who slept through the entire conversation in a carrier and who had, objectively, a very reasonable face for someone 5 months old.
By the end of an hour, I understood the full architecture of the parking situation, the history of the Gerasimov dispute in enough detail to prepare a 2-page brief, and that Lena had once been a lawyer before the baby and had every intention of returning to it and was simply, currently, surviving. I told her she seemed to be doing it very effectively. She laughed, the surprised, slightly involuntary kind, and said no one had said that to her in months. That afternoon, I went to see Semyonich. Semyonich was 67, had worked in this building for 17 years, and had the bearing of a man who had seen everything and formed precise opinions about most of it. He sat behind his desk in the lobby with a small television playing softly and a cup of tea, and he looked at me when I came in with the neutral watchfulness of someone reserving judgment. I set a second cup of tea on the desk in front of him. He looked at the cup, then at me. "You're the one who asked about my car." "Yes, Nina Petrovna, apartment 213, temporarily." "Saw your message." He picked up the cup. "Not many people notice things like that." "I notice most things." I sat down across from him. "Tell me about the building." He was quiet for a moment. "What specifically?" "Everything you think is worth knowing." He looked at me for another moment. Then he put down his tea, folded his hands on the desk, and began. He talked for an hour and a half. I took notes in a small notebook. Not because I would forget, but because people talk longer and more honestly when they see you writing things down. By the time I left, I knew. The boiler situation in detail, including the specific clause of the maintenance contract that the management company was likely in violation of. The full history of every long-standing dispute in the building. Which residents could be relied upon in a crisis and which could not. And the complete biography of the cat, who was named Barsik by consensus, was approximately 4 years old, male, unneutered, and had been living in the building since a family on the 3rd floor had moved out without him. "He needs papers," Semyonich said when we got to Barsik. "If management finds him, they'll call the service. He needs someone registered as the owner." "I'll take care of it." Semyonich looked at me. "You have a cat?" "I will by Thursday." By Thursday, I had filed the appropriate documents with the building management. Barsik was officially registered as a household pet belonging to apartment 213, temporary residence of Nina Petrovna Sokolova. Barsik himself was informed of this arrangement on Friday morning, when I put a bowl of food outside the stairwell door where he was known to sleep. He ate it, considered me briefly, and then headbutted my ankle. I took this as acceptance. Anton discovered the arrangement that evening when he came home and found Barsik sitting outside our door. "Mom, why is there a cat in the hallway?" "He lives here now, officially. I filed the paperwork." "He lives in the hallway?" "He lives in the building, but he prefers this end of the hallway. We've reached an understanding." "We are not getting a cat." "You're not getting a cat. I got a cat, temporarily, as a registered building resident with official documentation. There's a difference." Anton went inside. I gave Barsik a small piece of cheese that Semyonich had mentioned he liked, and Barsik took it with the dignified precision of someone who has been managing humans for years. The parking dispute was resolved on a Tuesday evening, 2.5 weeks after I joined the building chats. This required a meeting, not an official one, just a conversation in the lobby between Gerasimov from the 2nd floor and a large, permanently irritated man from the 4th floor named Mikhail, who had been in a state of simmering conflict with Gerasimov since 2021 and who, according to Semyonich, had not voluntarily spoken to him in over a year. I invited them both for tea in the lobby at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. I framed it as a practical matter. I had reviewed the documentation both sides had shared in the building chat. I had a suggestion. I thought 15 minutes would be sufficient. Gerasimov arrived first. Mikhail arrived 4 minutes later, saw Gerasimov, and looked at me with the expression of a man who has just understood he has been mildly deceived.
Nina Petrovna. Mikhail, thank you for coming. Sit down, please. I made tea. He sat. Because when someone his mother's age makes tea and gestures at a chair, most men of a certain generation sit down. This is simply how it works, and I have relied on it reliably for 40 years. I laid out both sets of documentation. I explained, in the tone I used when explaining audit findings to department heads who didn't want to hear them, that the original allocation of parking spaces in this building had been done incorrectly in 2012, and that both of them had partial documentation supporting their claims, which was why neither had been able to resolve it through the management company. What they needed was a joint statement to the HOA requesting a formal reallocation review, which I had drafted. If both of them signed it, the review would be legally obligated to happen within 60 days. If neither signed, nothing would happen for another 3 years minimum. I put the document between them. They read it. Then they looked at each other, for the first time apparently in over a year. This would actually work? Yes, I checked the relevant provisions. The management company has been stalling because neither of you filed jointly. This closes that gap. A pause. Gerasimov signed first. Mikhail signed 30 seconds later without another word. They didn't shake hands, but Gerasimov nodded at Mikhail on the way out, and Mikhail nodded back. Semyonich, who had been watching from his desk with his arms folded, gave me a look that I interpreted as professional respect. The following week, I ran into Mikhail in the elevator. He looked at me. "You're Anton's mother." "Yes." "He's a good tenant, quiet." A pause. "You're different from him." "Yes." The elevator opened on his floor. He got out, turned back. "If you need anything, building-related, come find me." "I will. Thank you." The doors closed. I stood in the empty elevator and permitted myself a small moment of satisfaction. 38 years of working with people who didn't want to cooperate had taught me one reliable thing. Most disputes are not about what they appear to be about. They're about someone not feeling heard. Once you address that, the paperwork tends to take care of itself. The Housing Committee meeting was 2 weeks after the parking resolution. The Housing Committee of the building was a formal body, 5 members, elected annually, responsible for overseeing the relationship between residents and the management company. They met once a month. I asked Semyonich if I could attend as a visitor. "You can observe." He looked at me. "They're not very organized." "I'll bring cookies." "That will help." The 5 members were Vera from the 6th floor, who had given me the chat link, a retired engineer named Fyodor Ilyich, 2 women in their 60s whose names I learned were Tamara and Galina, and Konstantin, who was in his 40s and worked in IT and had been elected because no one else volunteered. They met in the storage room behind the lobby around a table with a water-stained surface and chairs that didn't quite match. I sat in the corner with a notebook and said nothing for the first 20 minutes. The meeting, as Semyonich had predicted, was not organized. Topics were introduced and abandoned. Someone had brought a complaint about noise from the apartment on the 7th floor, but no one had written it down formally, and without a written complaint, no official process could begin. The boiler repair was mentioned 3 times without resolution because no one had the current contract language. I had the current contract language. I had printed it out before the meeting, along with the relevant municipal regulation about maintenance response times and a 1-page summary of the management company's documented delays. In the 21st minute, Fyodor Ilyich said, with some frustration, "We need someone who knows how to write these things properly." I said from the corner, "I can help with that." 5 faces turned toward me. I explained briefly who I was and what my background was. I offered to draft the formal noise complaint, the boiler repair demand, and a response letter to the management company regarding the 2021 invoice.
I said it would take me about an hour. Tamara looked at Galina. Galina looked at Fyodor Ilyich. You do this for free? I live here. It benefits me too. A pause. Well, said Constantine, who had been the most skeptical face in the room, let's see what you write. I had the drafts to them by the following morning. All 3 were submitted to the management company within the week. 2 received responses within the legally mandated time frame, something that Semyonich said had not happened once in the previous 3 years. At the next meeting, Tamara brought cake. Delina said, with the air of someone announcing something important, Nina Petrovna should be on the committee. I said I was only temporary. Temporary is fine. Fyodor Ilyich waved his hand. We'll put you as a consultant. I became a consultant to the housing committee of the building on a Wednesday in October, in the storage room behind the lobby, over tea and Tamara's honey cake. I mentioned this to Anton over dinner. He put down his fork. You're on the building committee? A consultant. It's informal. Mom, you're here for 3 months. Consulting doesn't require permanence. It requires competence. He picked up his fork again, looked at his plate, put it down again. How did this happen? I attended a meeting and brought cookies. The rest developed naturally. Christina, across the table, had the expression of someone watching a very slow-moving natural event that they had somehow failed to predict. And the cat? Barsik is doing well. Thank you for asking. I wasn't asking about his well-being. I was asking about... She stopped, started again. Is he going to be here permanently? Barsik lives in the building. He visits the hallway. Whether that constitutes permanent is a philosophical question. Christina looked at Anton. Anton looked at his dinner. We ate in silence for a while, with the comfortable quality of people who have all decided, for different reasons, to let the moment pass. The thing about Christina's best friend, Olya Seryogina, I want to be precise about this because I know how it sounds. I did not seek out Olya's chat intentionally. I know that sounds unlikely, but here is what happened, in sequence. Olya had been at the second philosophy and wine meeting, the one at Nadezhda's. We had talked for 40 minutes about a book on Stoicism that neither of us had finished, but both had strong opinions about. She had said at the end of the evening that she was in a building group chat if I ever wanted to organize another discussion in the neighborhood, and she'd sent me the link. The link turned out to be a chat that included approximately 20 women from 3 adjacent buildings, mostly in their 30s and 40s, which had started as a neighborhood walking group and evolved into something considerably more wide-ranging. Topics in the past week alone had included restaurant recommendations, a question about a good pediatric dentist, a spirited debate about whether a particular local shop was worth supporting given the attitude of its owner, and several threads that I would describe as general commentary on life. I had said hello, mentioned the philosophy discussion, and shared Nadezhda's address for next time. That was all. Christina discovered my presence in the chat on a Sunday morning. She came into the kitchen with her phone. She stood across from me at the table. Nina Petrovna, you're in Olya's chat. The neighborhood discussion group. Yes, she invited me. Olya is my best friend. I know. She mentioned you. She says very good things. Christina looked at her phone, then at me. You talked about me? Briefly. She said you had been friends since university, that you were very driven. A pause. She used the word driven. Yes. It seemed affectionate. Christina sat down. She was quiet for a moment in a way that was different from her usual quiet, less controlled, more genuinely uncertain. How do you do this? Not accusatorially, but with real curiosity. Do what? This. All of this. You've been here 10 weeks. You know half the building. You're on the committee. You have a cat. You're in my friend's group chat. You have people bringing you food and coming for tea and—" She stopped. "I've lived here for 3 years, and I don't know my neighbors' names." I looked at her for a moment. "You've been busy building your career. That's not a failure." "It feels like one." "Christina." I set down my coffee. "You and Anton live here and work very hard and come home tired, and there isn't always room for more. That's not isolation. That's a specific season of life." She was looking at the table. "That's what you are, too. A season. I think we made you feel like a problem, and you're not a problem." It was the first real thing she had said to me in 10 weeks. I didn't make it into more than it was. I said, "Thank you." And then I asked if she wanted more coffee, and she said yes, and we sat at the table for another 20 minutes, not talking about anything important at all. It wasn't a resolution. People don't resolve in 20 minutes over coffee. But it was a crack in the window, enough air to breathe. The party was Anton's idea. He had colleagues he hadn't seen in a while, people he liked, who he'd been meaning to have over. Nothing formal, a Saturday evening, some food, some wine, the apartment. He mentioned it to me on Wednesday. "You're welcome to join, obviously, or if you have plans." He said it carefully, which I noticed. "I'll be here. I can make food if you'd like." "You don't have to. I want to." "What do you want?" He looked at me with a slightly uncertain expression, as if he wasn't sure whether to be relieved or worried. "Something simple. Snacks." "I'll make smacks." What I made by Saturday afternoon: 2 kinds of blini, smoked salmon on rye, Nadezhda's mushroom pâté that she had taught me at the last philosophy meeting, Svetlana Borisovna's pickled tomatoes arranged on a plate with fresh herbs, Pablo's roasted chickpeas set aside in a separate bowl labeled vegan in small letters at the bottom for Pablo, who turned out to know Anton from a conference 2 years ago and had been invited separately. I discovered this when he arrived, and we looked at each other in mutual recognition. And a honey cake adapted from Tamara's recipe on the housing committee. By 7:30, there were 11 people in the apartment, and the food was mostly gone. I had meant to stay near the kitchen, but Vera from the 6th floor arrived. She also knew Anton's colleague Dima, it turned out, through a mutual friend, and pulled me into the conversation in the living room. And then Lena from the 5th floor appeared, unexpectedly, having been invited by Vera without telling me, with the baby asleep in a carrier and the alert expression of someone who hadn't been to a social event in 5 months and was experiencing it with full intensity. I ended up in the middle of the living room with a glass of wine, talking about the management company's response letter and why it was legally deficient, which is not a typical party conversation. But Constantine from the housing committee was there and found it relevant. And then 2 of Anton's colleagues joined because they happened to live in buildings with similar management problems. And within 30 minutes, we had what I could only describe as an impromptu consultation. I was aware at some point that the energy in the room had shifted around me. Not in a dramatic way, just that people had gradually reoriented. The conversations were happening near where I was standing. When I said something, people listened. When I moved to get more wine, the group moved slightly with me, the way a conversation follows a person who is holding its thread. This was not unfamiliar to me. It had been the texture of my working life for 30 years. What was unfamiliar was noticing, across the room, Anton watching it happen. He was standing near the window with a glass of wine, not quite in any conversation, not excluded. People moved past him, said things to him, he responded. But he was watching me in the way you watch something you are recalibrating your understanding of. I excused myself from the group and went to the kitchen. A few minutes later, Anton came in. We stood at the counter and I cut another piece of honey cake, and he leaned against the cabinet and looked at the middle distance for a moment. And then he said, "Mom, yes? I owe you an apology." I looked at him. For the party, the corporate party. What Christina said, I heard it. I was across the room and I heard it, and I didn't say anything. I just drove home and asked if you had a good time. You did. That was a cowardly thing to do. I didn't argue with that. I think I've been... He stopped, started again. I think I've been treating you like you were fragile. And I don't think I realized I was doing it until just now, watching you in there, which is embarrassing because you haven't been fragile a single day in your life. I was fragile for about 2 weeks after your father died. I know. I was there. And then I wasn't anymore. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I think I froze you there, in that version, because it was easier to worry than to just see you. I looked at my son, 53 years old, slightly rumpled, holding his wine glass with both hands the way he used to hold cups of hot chocolate when he was 9 and had a cold. Anton, I know you were worried. Worry is a kind of love. You just aimed it badly. He laughed a little, the reluctant kind. The halberd. Gennady needed a place for it. The chats. Someone had to sort out the parking. Christina's friends' group chat. Olya invited me. I simply didn't decline. He shook his head, looked at the floor, then looked up. Are you happy here, these months? I thought about it honestly. I was lonely for the first 3 weeks, and then I wasn't. Because of the clubs and the building and all of it. Because I did what I've always done. I walked into a room and found the work that needed doing. He nodded slowly. You could have told me, instead of just doing it. You could have asked, instead of discussing me in the kitchen like a problem to be solved. A pause. Fair. Yes. We stood there for a moment. From the living room came the sound of Lena laughing at something, a real laugh, the kind she probably hadn't had in months, and below it, the low murmur of 11 people who were, by every observable measure, having a good time. The food was incredible, by the way. Thank you. The mushroom thing, what is that? Nadezhda's recipe, from philosophy. Of course it is. He put his arm around my shoulders briefly, the way he used to when he was very young, before he got old enough to think it was something men didn't do, and then he straightened up and went back to his guests. I stood in the kitchen for a moment by myself, and I thought, all right, that's something. Then I cut another piece of cake and went back to the living room, where Vera and Lena and Pablo and Konstantin and 3 of Anton's colleagues were still arguing about whether the management company's response letter constituted a breach of contract, and I sat back down and told them about the specific clause they'd missed. I moved into my new apartment on the first Saturday of November. The deal had closed 2 weeks earlier, but I'd taken my time with the move. There was no rush, and I liked the idea of doing it properly. I hired 2 movers for the heavy things. I packed everything else myself in the same systematic way I'd packed the 2 suitcases I'd arrived with, category by category, labeled, organized. Semyonich helped me carry the last of the boxes from the storage unit. The shield was still in Anton and Christina's hallway. I had decided to leave it, partly because it genuinely suited the space, and partly as a monument to the general principle that property left in a hallway eventually becomes part of the hallway. Gennady said he would collect it eventually. I told him there was no hurry. My new apartment was on the 6th floor of the same building.
2 rooms, good light, a small balcony looking out over the courtyard. I had bought it 3 weeks into my stay at Anton's when I realized 2 things: that I liked this neighborhood and that I was not going to want to leave it when the original 3 months were up. Barsik moved with me. I had, in the course of the previous weeks, acquired a cat bed, 2 bowls, a quantity of food, and a relationship with a veterinarian Semyonich had recommended. Barsik considered the new apartment for approximately 20 minutes, determined that the balcony had acceptable strategic advantages, and took up a position on the windowsill that he has maintained since. The housing committee threw what they called a housewarming meeting, which was nominally a committee session but involved Tamara's honey cake and Galina's apple jam, and Fyodor Ilyich bringing a bottle of something from his dacha that he declined to name but which was excellent. We sat around my new kitchen table and discussed the boiler situation and the management company's latest letter and a new noise complaint from the 8th floor, and it felt exactly like working, which is to say, it felt like being alive. Lena came by with the baby, who was now 6 months old and had developed opinions about faces. Some he approved of, some he did not. He approved of mine, which I took as a reasonable judgment of character. She stayed for 2 hours. She was starting to think about going back to work in the spring. I told her I thought she was ready. Pablo came by with chickpeas and a bottle of wine, and we spent an evening talking about whether Spanish grammar was genuinely more logical than Russian, or whether that was simply what people said when they were learning it and hadn't yet reached the subjunctive tense. Svetlana Borisovna came by with tomatoes. She approved of the balcony. She said her knee had been better since the compress. Nadezhda came by to see the bookshelves. She said there was room for improvement. I told her she was welcome to leave books. Mikhail knocked on the door one afternoon to tell me that the management company had finally responded to the boiler letter and that the repair was scheduled for the following month. He delivered this information with the gravity of someone reporting important news and then left without waiting for a response, which is simply how Mikhail operates, and which I have come to find perfectly suitable. Anton came by with Christina on the second Sunday. They brought wine and the particular awkward warmth of people who are starting something over and are trying not to make too much of it. Christina looked at the apartment. She walked around it slowly, the way she had walked around her own apartment when she gave me the tour, but different, more curious, less performative. "It's good," she said, standing at the balcony door looking out over the courtyard. "It has good light." "It does." She turned around. She looked at me for a moment. "The group chat wants to know if you'll run the Stoicism discussion at the next meeting. Olya's been asking." "Tell Olya yes." Christina nodded. Something in her face settled. Not quite relief, not quite resolution, but something in that vicinity. The expression of a person who is slowly learning to see something they had previously looked past. We had dinner. Anton and I talked about his grandmother, my mother, her compress recipes, the way she had moved through rooms the same way I moved through them, with the purposeful calm of someone who always knew which problem to solve next. I hadn't talked about her in a long time. It felt like something opening. After they left, I stood on the balcony with Barsik and a cup of tea and watched the lights in the building across the courtyard. Somewhere below, in the lobby, Semyonich would be at his desk with his small television. On the 5th floor, Lena would be putting the baby to bed. On the 3rd floor, Fyodor Ilyich was probably reading. Mikhail, on the 4th, had probably settled in for his evening, whatever that looked like. I still didn't know much about Mikhail's evenings, only his mornings, which were efficient and taciturn and entirely reliable. 212 people in this building. By now, I knew perhaps 30 of them by name, enough to be somewhere. Not so many that it was overwhelming. I scratched Barsik behind the ears.
He made the sound that cats make when they have decided the arrangement is acceptable. Below in the courtyard, someone walked through with a dog. The lights in Vera's apartment on the 6th floor were on. A child's voice floated up from somewhere and then disappeared. I thought about what Anton had said at the party. I froze you in that version. He wasn't wrong. They had both, for a little while, looked at me and seen someone diminishing, someone in a transition, someone who needed to be managed and encouraged and monitored. And I had let it happen for those first uncomfortable weeks. Because I was tired and the apartment was unfamiliar, and grief takes different shapes at different times. And sometimes the shape it takes is letting people see you smaller than you are. But not indefinitely. You get tired of being small. It happens on its own, without drama. One morning you hear people in the kitchen discussing what to do with you, and you think, no. Actually, no. And then you register for 5 things, and then things develop from there. That was 6 months ago. Anton calls every Sunday now, not because he's checking on me, because he wants to talk. There's a difference, and I notice it. Last Sunday he called while I was at the philosophy discussion. I called back an hour later, and we talked for 40 minutes about his grandmother, about a problem he was having at work, about whether Barsic was adapting to winter on the balcony. He is. Barsic has opinions about cold weather, but has concluded that the strategic value of the balcony outweighs the inconvenience. I respect this as a position. Lena went back to work in March, part-time, at a law firm 3 metro stops away. She texts me sometimes when she has a question about building documentation. I answer when I know the answer and refer her to Fyodor Ilyich when I don't. The boiler was repaired in December. Semyonich called it a miracle. I called it what happens when you send a legally correctly worded letter, but perhaps those are the same thing. Christina and I had coffee again in February, just the 2 of us, at the cafe around the corner from the building. She asked me about the work I used to do. Not politely, but with genuine curiosity. The way you ask about something you realize you should have asked about before. I told her about Severinvest, about the department, about the 3-year cash flow problem. She listened the way good people listen when they have decided to actually hear something. She is, I think, a good person. She was just operating from the wrong information for a while. Most people are. Pablo and I are on lesson 47 of Spanish. He has developed a habit of switching to Spanish mid-conversation when he disagrees with something, which I find both annoying and extremely effective as a teaching technique. I now conduct approximately 30% of my housing committee correspondence in mental Spanish, which is not useful, but is satisfying. The halberd is still in Anton and Christina's hallway. Gennady has not collected it. I think at this point it simply lives there. The shield, too. You're the one who said I should socialize, I told Anton when he mentioned the shield for the last time back in October. He laughed, the real kind. I meant a book club, Mom. A book club is limiting. I contain multitudes. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, you do. I didn't answer that. I didn't need to. I went back to the living room where Barsic was asleep on the window ledge and the lights of the building across the courtyard were warm and ordinary and familiar. And I thought, well, this is where I live now. Not in a transition, not in a season, not as a problem to be managed or a project to be solved or a person disappearing into herself. Here, in this building, on this floor, with these people. 63 years old, chief accountant emeritus, registered owner of 1 cat, consultant to 1 housing committee, member of 5 clubs, 4 building chats, 1 neighborhood discussion group,
and one group chat belonging to Christina's best friend who says I am welcome and means it. Not isolated. Not at all.